Hi, this is Patrick Daniel from Patrick Daniel Law with Randy Canchi. We're here for the legal lens. Sorry about the hiatus that we've taken here for the last, couple of weeks between pregnant employees, between vacations, and between COVID-19. It's been a tough time for all of us. Before we start and go too much further, we want to address George Floyd. Um, this is a sad time for the American state of, I guess, our all entire well-being. We've gone from COVID now to yet another act of what I would say is aggression and murder at this point over an African American young man. He's a Houston native. He's being buried here in Houston. All of us aren't as informed as we ought to be. But the one thing we can all agree is that these are the sorts of things that can't and should not happen. Randy and I have dedicated our lives to taking care of people and protecting people that can't protect themselves. And I can't think of a better example of why we do what we do for a living, to point out the atrocities that have occurred. Um, People have been extremely critical. Imagine this, our president starting with the criticisms over what's been occurring in the United States since this has occurred. Um, while I appreciate everybody has their own opinion relative to how they should react to George Floyd, I think one thing we've got to remember is this is the sort of behavior that people are taking that is enabling and enacting change. Agree with it or don't agree with it, but people are behaving how they feel they're entitled to behave. Don't dispel it, don't overlook it, embrace it. There is some violence, but the violence is intended to enact change, and change is needed in this country. We are here for Pride Month. We have an interventional cardiologist, Dr. Michael Rutledge, here with us today, and we're going to interview him celebrating Pride Month. But as we all know, and as is important to the entire United States of America, as well as particularly the Patrick Daniel Law community, please know that change is needed because we're here about Pride Month, but change is needed about everything from a racial demographic across the country. This is about people that have been just subjected to persecution in a variety of different facets. Please utilize this as an opportunity for change, just as millions of people across the United States are protesting George Floyd's death. Please remember Pride Month as well as an opportunity to commit to change for the betterment of the United States. So while George Floyd didn't die in vain because people are using his memory to enact change across the country, please keep that in the back of your mind for the balance of this month, for Pride Month, as we try to enact change across the country for LGBTQ rights.
Correct.
Did I get it all?
I think so. I always get it wrong too. Yeah.
So with all of that in mind, Randy, introduce your friend and friend Patrick Daniel Law now.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us. I just wanted to add a little bit to that, which is, we're here. We're talking to for the month of June, members of the community that are out that are successful, that have overcome what I think is a tremendous amount of adversity. And I think there's no greater teacher than adversity. And when we started to talk about celebrating Pride and bringing on members of the community that are professionals, that are business persons, that are CEOs, one person that immediately came to mind is my dear friend, one of my best friends on this planet, Dr. Mike Rutledge. We've had some wonderful times. And in the time I've gotten to meet you, Mike, I've been really inspired by your story, what you've shared with me, and to the extent that you can share with some of our viewers, I'd like for you to share your story. But let's start out by talking. We know that you're a cardiologist. We know that you're in SoCal right now, but tell us a little bit about how you grew up, how you're educated, and what's led you to this point being a cardiologist in your late 30s.
So I'm a native Texan. I grew up right in the heart of Austin, Texas, and I loved every minute of it. Great city, wonderful place. For me, a bit of a dichotomy. Austin, of course, is one of the most free and liberal cities in the nation, and my family is a very conservative West Texas family. So it was a bit of a dichotomy growing up. My family highly prizes education over anything else. And probably what led me to medicine, probably for a lot of us, is our parents. My mother is a physician. the man she later married, who I've known my whole life, as her business partner, and then her husband, also a physician. So I'm kind of surrounded by it. And I think it's probably only natural that when you see your parents loving something so much, you look at it and you have kind of a vicarious experience through it. And that's where it started for me. And so I kind of single-mindedly pursued it, from high school to college at Southwestern, stayed close to home in Georgetown, not San Marcos. And then from there, after I graduated from Southwestern, I went to Texas Tech. So back to my roots, I guess, for medical school, and stayed at Texas Tech for residency in internal medicine. And finally left Texas in 2010 to go to Memphis, Tennessee for my cardiology fellowship. And then from there continued on up to Detroit for a year for interventional cardiology, and moved back down south to Atlanta for my first 5 years of private practice, which was an experience, and before heading west to Southern California. So where I think I will stay.
Yeah. We're at least here to stay through the summer because I need to go visit.
Yes.
But Mike, let me tell you, I mean, everybody always asks us questions that are straight, I guess, or not here, maybe not so familiar. When did you know, and then when did you come out?
By 13, I knew I was different.
Mm-hmm.
By 15, I could identify how I was different. I started dating men at 31. Until then, I dated women. So I a lot of internalized homophobia. Had a very religious upbringing that played into that. And I came out at 32 when I moved to Atlanta and when I started in private practice. And that was very intentional. For a lot of reasons. One was a fear of flat out losing my family. That was probably number one. Number two was I wasn't entirely sure I could be a gay doctor. I wasn't sure that was allowed. I didn't know any, never met any. Maybe one in all of my training, but it wasn't something that was ever spoken about. That was something I heard from the sidelines. That particular physician never ever mentioned anything about his home life or a partner or anything. And I didn't know if I would be able to obtain a residency if I came out. If I came out in college, I didn't know if I would be let into medical school. And to be honest, I still don't know that I would have been. Mm-hmm. And I definitely know in my last years of training, it would have been a very significant problem had anybody known. So I waited until I was out of training, in a job, financially on my own, without need of anybody else, before I was willing to come out and chance it, so to speak. And by that time, my first year of private practice is when I finally met other gay doctors. But I had to be in Atlanta to do it. So we're a heavier population there. So it was very conscious as to how and when I would go about doing it.
I think that's always been interesting to me that you've told me that, because I mean, we tend to believe that maybe the more educated we are, the more exposed we are, we're able to look at issues from a different kind of oculus, right? I know in the legal field, it's far more, especially with what we do, Patrick and I do plaintiffs work, we're very liberal, right? And it's very much, we're crusaders, we're warriors, like, don't F with us, we'll destroy you, we're gonna do whatever the heck we want. I find that interesting that there's such a disparity there, right, between the legal profession and the medical profession, because you're highly educated, highly skilled. Your motto, like your constitution, is to help so many people. So how do you account for that disconnect?
The place I would start is, what are the stereotypes of doctors? Unfailingly kind, smart, unfailingly empathetic, understanding. And there's a pedestal, right, that you get put on almost as if you're this omniscient individual who has a higher understanding of the world than everybody else around. And let me tell you how wrong that is. The farther I go in life, the more I've learned, the less I know.
Sure.
But doctors are people, and they come with all of the same biases, previous experiences, and learned behaviors, both good and bad, as everyone else. And if it's true that older generations tend to be more conservative and younger generations tend to be more liberal, you have to remember that doctors don't come out and start practicing until the average age of 35 to 40. I started when I was 32, and I started medical school at 21. So I was, well into adulthood when I'm starting private practice, but still, way younger than most of my colleagues. So I think when it comes to medicine, we kind of have this idealized belief, but it doesn't reflect reality, because you still have people with their own inherent experiences, own inherent biases. And no matter what, those always come into play, whether consciously or unconsciously. So I think that in and of itself is part of it. I think, for me, I trained in very conservative areas: West Texas, Memphis, Tennessee, Detroit, all not very liberal, socially liberal places. And the medical community does tend to be a reflection of whatever the values of the community is.
True. Yeah.
And I think the third component, whether for better or worse, and I wouldn't throw the baby out the bathwater. I'm not a particularly religious person. However, religion is something that is frequently included in medicine for patient benefit, and it does have benefit. That being said, I think there is also a drive for particularly religious individuals to end up in the medical community, because it's seen as a servant's place to be, a helper's place to be, laying hands on people. There are a lot of religious connotations that come into medicine, and I think it attracts that person. And frequently that comes with certain inherent biases against individuals who are different from you, particularly against the LGBT community. So I think all of those things play into it.
Sure. One thing that I was asked recently, and Patrick and I have actually talked about this, and in talking with our summer clerks and other lawyers, it's interesting when I look back on my life and I think the place that I came from, South Texas, the adversities that I've had, the trials and tribulations, all of the, let's say, damage, right, that's happened. You have an opportunity to do two things: sort of fold and become embittered, or you use it. And I know you have. So tell me, I don't take back any pain, but tell me if the struggles you've had as a gay man growing up, do you think that that's helped you to become a better physician, and why?
I would say yes. I don't think I would be as good at what I do. I don't think I would be as empathetic. Don't think I would be understanding. I think I would be far more judgmental. And that's something very easy to be in the world of medicine. If I were not gay. And to be honest, my perspective of that changed immensely over the last 6 years since I came out. When I was closeted, when I was dating women, I, like many of us, you put up the front. You learn how to act straight. Yeah, maximize those things that are considered more masculine, minimize those features about yourself that would be considered more feminine, and fit in. And in doing so, there's a certain mentality that comes along with it. I very realistically went from being the white heterosexual male majority to overnight on Facebook becoming a minority. And there's a significant change that happens there. All of a sudden, I let myself be who I am. The world sees me for who I am. And the world treats me differently than it does now. And there are avenues and experiences that I have, both very indirect and subtle, and both directed right at you, that you experience. And I don't think without those experiences in the last 6 years particularly, I would be as empathetic and understanding as to what other people have to go through. I don't think I would. I know, in fact, I can tell you, I wouldn't see what's happening in America today the same now as I would have 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I would have seen it very differently.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you're out on the margins, you learn to look at things. I've shared the story with you with my mom. I came out at 24, and 6 months after that happened, she said, you know what? I really think it was kind of a blessing that you were. And I was like, a blessing? She said 2 reasons. Randy, you might have been a real jerk because you had everything. You never had to struggle with school and with friends and with, we dressed you well, we fed you well kind of deal. And then she said we wouldn't have been as close. But I think it was so helpful to have that support from my parents. And we look back, you know, you're 38, I'm 40. I look back and I look at sort of the younger generation, and I think, man, kiddo, you've got a road. But now that you know what you know, what do we tell that 13-year-old that's in Del Rio, Texas, right? Or that 14-year-old that's in Memphis that is scared to death, and mom and dad are, you know, telling them if you're a certain way, you're going to hell, or you're doing all these things. Like, what do you tell that person now after having achieved this education and become successful and become adjusted and become empathetic? What do you tell that kid?
I think the first thing, the world, thank God, is changing.
Yeah.
I think the world as it is now is vastly different from what it was 10 years ago. Vastly different. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I may not be able to see it right at this moment of time, but I think on the whole, it's hugely different. When I was going through, my mother was a physician. I was a teenager. And my mother's not just a physician, she's a urologist. She's a female urologist. She knows how the world works, right? You know, these things are not, you know, something she's unaware of or never encountered. But, you know, again, doctors are people too. And frequently who you are in your workplace is not always mirrored in your personal life. And my mother is also very principled and very conservative. And at that time, we were pretty religious. We went to a church where you spoke in tongues sometimes, and we went 3 days a week, and we were very biblical in that set of beliefs. And I knew early on being gay was not okay. It was not going to be okay with her. It was not going to be okay in his family. And I think if I had come out at that early age, my fear is that I would have been an orphan. I don't know that that would have happened. I think my mother probably would have definitely taken me to church. I may have likely gone to conversion therapy. So I didn't say any of those things. I knew if I kept my mouth shut and I tried to fix myself, then my education would be paid for and I could keep going to school and eventually be able to stand on my own 2 feet. So to kids now, one, I think the world is a better place for them. I think it's a safer place for them. Maybe not always at home, but I think there are more places for them to reach out and to see. I think it is better in that there are visible people out there that are openly gay. They're who they are and they're succeeding. I didn't know any gay doctors growing up. I didn't know any gay lawyers either. And I certainly didn't think that I could be one. I certainly thought there was a choice that had to be made. And I think it's important that our youth can see you can be who you are, whoever that is, straight, gay, bi, purple, I don't know, whatever, and still be successful in the world. And I think to that young gay kid, they need to see that and they need to hear that. And I think probably the best part about the world is now you see that. You see gay doctors on TV. You see gay professional characters on TV. You hear about them in news stories. They run for public office. Those things didn't happen when I was a kid. And I think that's vastly important. And I think it's something that has to be continued and pushed for in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're talking about, Patrick and I have our shirts on, and what's happening to me, I hope, and we can talk about degrees and peaceful rioting versus rioting and looting. There's a spectrum, but what at least hopefully the denouement is at the end that it is creating, it's recalibrating things, right? And as lawyers, we see laws change as a result of these uprisings. Whether you were, World War II Japanese in concentration camps, or women rights, or people with disabilities. Patrick and I, what we do, if laws are enacted from lawsuits where we create safer vehicles, right? Safer safety belts and airbags, but what people I think hopefully realize is if you stay quiet, like you're saying, change is not going to happen. We have to show, we have to sort of create an energy to make things change, and that's what it's about. So we have to be active. To remain neutral really does a disservice to the oppressed. I mean, whether
Absolutely does.
So I agree with you. Patrick, anything you want?
Yeah, I wanted to ask one question, and I obviously appreciate your struggle. I do, because I think your story it's been educational to me, because I come from effectively white privilege. I've never had to struggle through the things that you and Randy have had to struggle through. And I between y'all's story, the George Floyd story, and the things that people have to encounter, my heart goes out to you, and I appreciate what you're doing by coming on the show. But the one thing I'm curious about is, what is the one thing in your mind that got you from age 15 when you knew to 31 when you were able to come out and start dating men? What got you through each day? What was the one thing you could look back on and go, I can do this?
Well, to be honest, that period is such a double-edged sword. Because I look back and I wonder if I had and I had a bit of a different setup. So much of who we are and who we do and what we do and how we do it is so complex in how it relates. For me, my mother and my biologic father divorced when I was about 4. My biologic father, when I was about 7, went to court to get his parental rights waived. And he was gone after that. So I already knew what it was to lose 75, 80% of my family in one fell swoop. That was before I ever had a sexuality. So 13 years comes along. I know I'm a little different. 15 years comes along. I know what I am. And then comes the decision-making process. I know what I am. I know what I am, and being gay does not fit within this mold in this family. I also know a family can get rid of you. A parent can get rid of you. So for me, that conscious decision was, okay, well, I'm not going to come out because I may not have a roof over my head or food in my stomach. So what I did was, largely, rather than pour my energy and myself into that kind of self-discovery that people experience during their teenage years and during college, I poured myself into school. That's where I knew I could put all my energies, because I wasn't going to put it over here into social things. I wasn't going to be exposed. I wasn't going to let anybody find out. I would deny it every day and focus on school. And to be honest, I don't know if I would have been as successful as I have academically if that wasn't a part of it. So for both good and bad, we have things that are inextricably linked.
Yeah.
And as I got older and kind of moved forward, and I had experiences that kind of reinforced that with family and friends, until I reached a point where I was, in my late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I wasn't going to marry a woman, because if I did that, I would have ruined her life. Eventually, this is going to come out, and then, where does that leave her? So I waited, and I waited until I moved to Detroit, where I didn't know a single person, to start having those experiences so that I could go through that on my own terms at a time when I would be financially stable, so that if the worst did happen, I would at least be able to keep a roof over my head.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, fortunately for me, by that date and time, 15 years later, the world had changed. My family had changed. My parents were different people, and it all worked out beautifully for me. But those years were hard, but I wouldn't change them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. They gave me the motivation to focus on what I could be great at. And later in life, it gave me the empathy to be a better person, a better doctor, and to see the world from a different point of view. I lived as an adult, white, heterosexual male with that point of view, and then rapidly changed it to a complete other spectrum. And it's good to see both of those points of view. It's good to be able to understand, when I see a patient, the different places that people are coming from. And I think when you understand people, whether you agree with them or not, you find a way to love them.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, sure.
Really good point.
Beautiful.
Because I think it's something we overlook a lot, the diversity within ourselves, but externally as well, that we ultimately, and I think it goes with today's theme with George Floyd. If we treated each other out of acts of love instead of acts of anger, we'd all get along a hell of a lot better. I mean, I admire your
Absolutely.
and I appreciate what you've been through, although obviously I don't understand what you've gone through. And I think you've given all of us here today a much better perspective of what it is, because people are going to walk along and see, oh, look at this successful cardiologist. He's making money. He's doing this. But nobody knows those dark days and those tough times that you went through. which I think it's really admirable for you to have shared that with everybody here today so openly. And I always appreciate how candid Randy is about it. And I mean, he has nothing but great things to say about you, and you've obviously delivered on all the promises of what a good person you are. So we really appreciate that.
And I've told them all the crazy stuff too, Mike. So they. But I think we're going to open up. We've got some questions maybe that people have.
Yes. Dr. Rutledge, in your opinion, why is LGBTQ-friendly healthcare so hard to find?
You know, that is a difficult and it's, I think, a historical question. And I will tell you this. I think the biggest part and the biggest problem when it comes to the LGBT community in medicine is not things that are outright homophobic. I think it's neglect. When did being gay start to become a topic in America? Not in the 1950s, not in the 1960s, not in the 1970s. It was hush hush. You didn't talk about it, you didn't say about it, somebody was different. And you never really labeled it or identified it. When did it get identified? The 1980s with the AIDS pandemic. And you have a group of people that were ostracized in a disease that wasn't even admitted to at the governmental level until Rock Hudson died, really, only because he was a personal friend of the Reagans. And then HIV became something, and then gays became something, and then it became a topic, and then it became an issue, and then it became visible, but not in a positive way. And since then, I can't say that it's really a topic other than outside of HIV and sexually transmitted infections that is really talked much about in medicine. I didn't know. When I was a resident in internal medicine in Lubbock, Texas, we didn't talk about any specialized needs that gay men have as it relates to their health care, but we have them. And I learned them from a patient. I had a patient who had been living with HIV since 1984, and now this was in 2008. And he asked me for certain exams. He asked me for certain things on a physical exam. I didn't even know what they were. And I went back to my attending and I said, well, what equipment do I use to do this? What equipment do I use to do an anal pap smear? And my attending said, I don't even know what that is. What is that? Mm-hmm. So I would say the biggest issue there is neglect. And when you go through medical school and you go through medical training, you talk about physiologic differences between different race groups. You even talk about different cultural differences between different groups and different ethnicities so that you can relate to the patient. Never once did anyone talk about anything related to gay or transgender medicine. So I think that's probably the biggest part of it. And in truth, it's not always that surprising, right? People tend to gravitate towards what they know. And I didn't know any gay doctors, so how are they going to teach me about gay medicine? They don't know themselves. So I think kind of neglecting a population is the most significant part of that. And I think depending upon where you are in the country is how it relates to that. In West Texas, super conservative, and that's not going to be something you find there. If you go to Midtown Atlanta, which has a heavily gay population, you're going to find a lot of gay doctors who are focused in providing those medical services. If you go to other more conservative states, not to pick on anybody, Utah, I've had friends at the time who couldn't find a doctor to meet their needs there. And I've actually done it remotely, which is outside my radiology practice, but they had a need and no other way to address it. So I think that's where it starts, is simply you cannot provide a service that you are uneducated and know nothing about. So medical education has to broaden itself to include us, and more specifically includes transgender individuals.
Right.
Because that was not once talked about.
Yeah.
So during my training. So yeah, I think that's where the root of the issue lies.
Yeah, that's great. I never even thought about that. What
Okay,
else,
we have a last question before we have to wrap up, which is coming from Amanda. Is there somewhere I can go and find who supports LGBTQ medical care? Like, is there a website or resources that you know of?
I don't know of any particular one website that you can look at to find an LGBT-friendly doctor in your area. Most major cities will have them, and if you know, it gets a little bit tricky with your insurance too, because you have to find somebody who takes your insurance. And in that regard, gay and gay-friendly doctors are no different than any other doctors. You're on somebody's contracts, you're not on other contracts. So as far as for you in particular, the first place I would start is talk to your insurance company. Frequently, the insurance companies will have information on who is a gay-friendly doctor, a gay-friendly therapist, and who particularly treats that population of individuals. Most cities have some kind of gay-oriented website or newsletter, and frequently you'll find gay doctors are advertising, gay clinics are advertising in those, and those are always a good place to look.
That's great. Mike, I think we've got a minute or two left, but you know how I feel. Love you to pieces. Thank you so much for.
I love you too, my friend.
Like I said, this, even just sitting here, I've even learned some more stuff about you, more than I thought I knew, and just to have this different perspective from a physician on some of these issues. And frankly, my hope, I told Patrick and Nicolette when we decided to do this, was if there's some kid out there that, like I said, is in Salt Lake City, Utah, because we both know there's more than one, right? 13 and is scared to death and is being sent to conversion therapy and someday wants to be a cardiologist or wants to be a lawyer. You know, I know that your advice to him or her would be, it's going to be okay, kiddo. You're going to be fine. Keep fighting. The most valuable thing in life, and really the hardest thing in life, you and I have learned this and we're still learning it, is to be honest about who you are. It's really tough. We tend to not always like our own stories. But I think you being here with us today, hopefully is going to, you know, plant that seed and that person's some hope in them to say, it's going to be fine. You're going to be great. You're going to have a great life and it's all going to work out. So thank you for being with us, my friend. I love you.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Okay. Oh yeah, and we're supposed to show some swag. So you're going to be getting a care package, but we've got, look at this. We're going to put this on Patrick later.
That's right.
But we've got like pins. The whole office is having to wear these pins for the month. See, the whole
Voluntarily, Randy.
amazing.
Voluntarily.
Yeah. And then we've got like all this stuff. So we're going to be sending you some things, but for the people that are watching, listening, we're going to send people, I think
First 5 people.
Yeah, first 5 people. That, what do they have to do? Oh, that send us a DM. We're gonna send you a
Send us a
package of
case.
all this stuff so that you're all set for Pride Month and you can do whatever you want to do with it. So, but we'll send you all that, Mike. But again, we appreciate you, my friend. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. Nice to
Thank
meet
you all so much. I had a great time.
I'll call you later.
All right. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.